on to have plenty of injuries, but a pretty good 10-year professional rugby career. Retired with a neck injury in 2004, and then went into the real world of work, initially real estate and financial services, which was a good time, early 2000s, and then not so good later in the 2000s. So I had to sort of really transition into a proper world of work. And then really through my experiences in sport and business over the last 30 years, and then a sort of freak invite to a charity climb to the top of Kilimanjaro in Africa with 15 former Welsh rugby captains and Warren Gatland, the Welsh rugby coach, and a bunch of people to raise money for a cancer hospital. I really sort of tripped over a lot of stories about players, how they retired and the challenges they faced when they retired from professional sport or amateur sport. And it really hit home to me on that trip in Africa that if these guys could struggle, then anyone could struggle. And it gave me a real mission and a purpose in my life to go out and help other people. Got back from that trip very excited, spoke to my brother, who was also a professional rugby player, 2 years older than me. He retired the same time as we. We were looking for something really to get our teeth into, and this was it. This was our purpose then for the foreseeable future. So we pooled our time, effort, money, and resources to put together Athlete Career Transition in 2010, launched in 2012 with some small to medium-sized companies, and then after a few years, some of the larger corporate companies were early adopters of what we were doing in terms of helping elite athletes transition from sport into the business world. And then here we are 16 years later or 15 years later, and we've helped thousands of athletes all over the world. We worked in sort of 27 different countries, and we're sort of very proud of the work that we do, helping athletes in multiple different sports. We're currently in the process of scaling up the business in terms of our digital offering. We're looking to create a digital community for athletes to thrive in, with companies and brands, and a place for them to go and learn, find new careers, explore entrepreneurial options, and connect with each other on a one-to-one level, create groups, and really organically help each other. So we're very excited about that. That'll be coming out in the new year, and you'll hear a bit more about that as we go.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely love this. And research, for this, and what this is just to sort of kick off an ongoing effort of conversations and connecting people and opening up opportunities. Andy's company, just whichever way you look, they come up, right? Because they've just found this really powerful shared purpose and niche that is obviously proving to be very successful. And so obviously encourage anyone, whether you're an athlete, whether you're an organisation looking to further this conversation, to reach out to Andy on that. And then I just wanted to recognise a few folks. We had, as is always the case with LinkedIn, loads of people register, some loads of Olympians and former national team coaches and everything else. And part of the reason I'm recording this is I'm going to send the link to every single person that registered and is unable to attend today, along with a synopsis. And I would welcome any of you to share it with anybody that you feel may be interested. Again, at this point in time, it's purely around connecting the dots and building bridges and sort of opening up opportunities, and that's the intention. But a few folks on the call, I did want to just kind of recognise and thank them for showing up. Ben McGregor's here with the Global Rugby Players Foundation, which is a new organisation set up to support rugby players around the world, and he's the sort of head of their central programming there, and we had a great conversation. I wanted to recognise Phil's boss, Brett, because literally 2 days ago, when Phil was saying, "Hey, I've literally just started my role here, I know, and I'd made a commitment to Mark to do this. Is it okay?" And Brett's like, "Yeah, not only is it okay, but I'll try and join myself, because as you know, like, we like to hire athletes and other elite level performers." So I'm like, "Well, okay, that's pretty fantastic." Chris Mateen, a professional athlete and representative of the Rugby Players Association here in the US. Gina Tukey, who I've had a couple of conversations with, who just does some amazing work, largely focusing on sort of mental health and performance for college, pro, and sort of transitioning athletes over here in the US. Luke Hume, former National Sevens team player and 15s team player on the call. John Flynn, head of AI sales for Google. If you've ever got a title, that's the one right now, and probably pretty busy chap. So always appreciated to see John joining in, and a bunch of other people. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. This is an all-star team. So let's kick off with some questions. Again, feel free to throw some in the chat. We will tackle those towards the end. But what I wanted to start off with was most of us on the call are probably pretty familiar with. Just it's about athletes, like characteristics, and what is it? What are some of the top characteristics that our panelists see athletes exhibiting, and what was it about them competing in elite level sports that kind of honed or developed those characteristics with those folks? So we started with Kelly last time. We'll start with Phil this time. What are your thoughts on that, Phil?
Yeah, the top three characteristics that I wanted to bring to the discussion today was the first one being work ethic. So I believe that athletes, to get to wherever you have to be, you have to have a tremendous work ethic, which, in turn, kind of relays into your discipline and all those different variables where, if you're working a regular job, it's really important to have, those types of characteristics to, obviously meet your quotas and your quarterly goals and all your objectives. So I think it's really important to have a great work ethic, which we obviously all do to, with the discipline as required, sleep hygiene, all that, that's strength training. The second thing was determination. So, you might need to gain 5 pounds. You might need to lose 10 pounds. You might need to, pick yourself up off the ground after you just got your ass beat in a contest, a performance or a match. All right. So I think like determination, so you're going to be less likely to just collapse after a bad, performance in the business world. And the last thing I think is resiliency, and not just in the way like, okay, you lose a game and you got to go back to work and find a way to get that done, but the resiliency that it takes to have your career. Like in 2004, I had a neck injury too, Andy, which I didn't know. And then to be able to find a way to reinvent yourself. I think that's like what all elite athletes have to do. They have to learn. It's almost like a Viking principle. You have to learn a way to reinvent yourself, because if you don't, then you're going to be stuck. And I think the last thing was something from that Kelly just brought up was just that discipline that we talked about. And like the reason why you probably got that remote job is because they know that you're going to have the discipline to stay on task, handle what you need to as a family person, and handle what you need to be as an employee. So that discipline to get things done and to be task oriented, I think, is really important as well.
Yeah, awesome. Andy, what builds have you got on that?
Yeah, I think there's probably, apart from that, there's a couple more really that I would look at. I mean, athletes love a scoreboard. We're very goal orientated. This is probably, going on Phil's point, and why Brett's so interested. We do love a scoreboard. We like to measure ourselves. We like feedback, and there's nothing more brutal than a scoreboard on that. So, to get results, to really go out there and not worry about making mistakes, look to improve on everything, debrief, get feedback from your peers around you. What was good about that? What was not good about that? So that then they become natural achievers in those sort of business environments. Probably another one that leads on from that is really like about how they perform under pressure. And pressure, we know what that creates diamonds, and a lot of athletes from an early age have had pressure built on them unknowingly, and they've expanded their comfort zones in terms of how they can deliver and perform under pressure, to a point that you chucked a normal person into a scenario of a professional athlete, they'd crumble straight away. Of course they would. It's just not something that happens overnight. So when they go into a work environment, as long as that's done sustainably and gradually, and with the right knowledge and support around them, the athletes can deal again with the highest pressure in those workplaces. And then really the things that they do on a day-to-day basis, especially in team sports, is build that sense of teamwork, camaraderie, and the individual leaders within those groups come to the fore. And athletes naturally are pretty good leaders, whether that's just themselves and their immediate people around them, or they're leading a group of men or women towards a common goal. So yeah, there's some classic ones there that are super transferable into the business environments.
Yeah, love those. And that goal orientation, actually, when I was in that youth development space, we were using different methodologies to measure social emotional learning skills for kids, right, which are essentially life skills that enable them to be successful. And goal orientation was one that consistently showed up with the young people that were playing sports differently than it did for other kids. And so just imagine you're honing that from such an early age. Such a good one, along with feedback, which so many of the companies I work with are trying to work out, or how can we more effectively give them feedback and timely feedback. And elite level sports athletes, like, that's literally the glue in the team, is literally taking that feedback, giving that feedback, and being really candid and honest about it, because we're all bought in together, we've all got each other's backs, and we need to know that in order to improve. Kelly, what ads have you got?
Well, a lot has been covered. So I think one that I could perhaps bring to life with a little more of a story is something that I found in my post athlete career that's really helped me, is that I have a really good ability to problem solve and have an attitude of any problem, we can solve it, which I've gotten from sports. It's not like something goes wrong and it's not like, oh, we have to dwell on it. It's like, no, there's a problem, we need to solve it. Once it's solved, we can go back and figure out the prevention. And an example of this from sports is at the World Cup in 2013. We qualified for the bronze medal match against Spain. Sevens tournaments, for those of you who are not familiar, you play multiple games in a day, and usually you have between like a 2 or 3 hour break between each game. This is going to be our final game. All of a sudden, the skies open up, there's lightning. Our game gets delayed for 6 hours. So obviously all of our plans of like when we're going to nap, when we're going to eat, when we're going to warm up, all goes out the window. Like, we did not contingency. We contingency for maybe like a 1 hour delay, 6 hour delay, not in there. No one on my team started whining like, oh, this is terrible. Or like, your mindset is in that future. Like, okay, this is a new challenge. This is a new goal. We still have to win this game. The circumstances have changed. What do we need to do? It was all about what we can do in the present to reach our goal, rather than dwelling about what was in the past. We figured it out. We had to go. Moscow, also not a great place I would recommend based on that experience in terms of accessibility to food. So we had to go out and, like, as players, we went out, we figured out where to get more food, so we were properly fueled. We ended up winning that game in overtime, because we had figured out how to prepare ourselves appropriately with those changes. And I find that now in my, like, something's happened with an insurance claim that you didn't expect. It's not about, okay, complaining or figuring or anything like that. It's like, all right, what do we need to do to fix it immediately, effectively, so that we can still reach our goals?
I love that. And thank you. Thanks, Kelly, for the story and the context, and sort of giving that in terms of the current reality, right? In terms of your new professional environment, or not new, but the non-athlete one. Okay, so brilliant characteristics, tons of potential. And what some people are probably a little less familiar with, unless they've been through it, is that there is this pretty major transition challenge for a lot of athletes. It's not too dissimilar challenges that military folks face, for a lot of the similar reasons, other than obviously not discriminating against the fact that what's at stake in playing and competing in a league or a game or a tournament versus what's at stake for them is different. But there's a lot of similar characteristics and a lot of similar challenges. So from the panel's perspective, Andy, if you want to kick us off on this, you've obviously had a lot of experience working with athletes over the last sort of 15 or so years on this, as well as your own journey. What do you think are the top few challenges you see athletes struggle with on transition or in preparation for it?
Yeah, I'll try and leave a bit of meat on the bones for Kelly and Phil. I think one of the big ones is that sort of loss of identity and loss of support group. The identity piece is quite difficult, because you're so wrapped up in being an athlete, and that most of everything you do is around that, either on and off the court or pitch. So it is a struggle, and it's something we often do with athletes when we place them straight out of sport into a new business, that we tell them not to leave that behind. And in the first month or so, they will present who they are to the working group or even a wider management group of stakeholders who are in that company, so they can understand who the athlete is and where they've come from and why they're aligning their new career with that company. And that we tend to find that helps, that they can actually use that identity in the new workplace. And a lot of people talk to them about their sport and the similarities between that and the new environment. So yeah, the support group's a big one, because even from the players around you and the athletes around you, a lot of them are friends, and you can kind of lose that. And the coaches, love them or hate them, you crave that feedback, and to have a new purpose in a new career fills that void slightly, even to the point that I don't know about you, Kelly, that our physios that I've had, physiotherapists that I've had, are pretty good psychologists as well, and you can feel a lot better after having a bit of treatment from a physio, and just simple things like that. So you have to come up with mechanisms and ways to sort of solve those problems, and not look for the bad substitutes, look for good substitutes, whether that's health and exercise. You've got to look after your wellness and well-being. Other one, just one more just on that, is probably the sort of perceived lack of business experience, and that's why we do work with a lot of our partners to make sure that those first few months are pretty well structured, that they're not thrown in at the deep end, that the manageable. Athletes tend to have a sort of a hockey stick learning curve, that they'll be very excited going in because they don't know what they don't know, and then after 3 months they do know what they don't know, and that's terrifying. And then after 6 months they've kind of caught up to speed and filled lots of those knowledge gaps, and then the experience comes over time, and then they will have a very accelerated pathway through their experience with the business then. But yeah, I'll leave a bit on for the rest of the guys.
Yeah, no, I mean, the one thing you said about identity, which I thought was really insightful there, was you don't have to leave your identity behind you just because you stop playing. It's still part of who you are. And think of all the different identities we have across the different spheres of our lives, right? Like you can be a parent, a coach, a leader, an athlete, and you show up, you're aiming to show up as the best version of yourself in each. So the key is, that's the one you knew, that's the one you had to do day in, day out. But what's the new identity as an individual contributor, and what elements of this one can infuse into that one? And you've got other identities in your life, so own them and be intentional about how you can apply them most effectively. Phil, what are your thoughts on this one?
You're on mute, Phil.
Phil.
I just to build kind of on what you said, Mark, I think the most important thing is radically accepting, where you are, right? You have to understand that you're no longer a professional athlete, and you have to move on to another chapter in your life. Like if you're not at that stage of radical acceptance, then you're going to lead to some of the other issues that I'll talk about very quickly. All right. So obviously everybody talks about identity and loss. That's true. To me, it's like you're mourning the death of your previous self. You're a high level athlete. You're running, you're jumping, you're catching, you're traveling the world, and all of a sudden you're not. All right. So that can be very difficult, because you're mourning and you're grieving that purpose in your mind. That was your sole purpose to be on this earth, was to do this athletic endeavor. So the reality is depression typically kicks in if you haven't put in good best practices as far as what you're going to do or have any direction. And then you might have a bunch of rejection from things that you feel that you'd be a great fit because of those experience gaps. So then, unfortunately, in football, it's a little different in every sport. Oftentimes, many guys start to drink more, start to develop poor habits, as Andy talked about, kind of bringing in some chemicals and things that are not going to help you, because you're just down in the dumps and you're trying to figure all these things out. So there's in football, there's a lot of extreme challenges from that, because you're just trying to recreate that feeling. And I can promise you, there is no feeling like running out of an NFL stadium tunnel, especially at home, for anybody. So you're like, for you to think that you're going to find that somewhere else in that capacity, that dopamine rush, that's just not practical. So you need to radically accept it.
Yeah, I love that. It gave me goosebumps. I think all the athletes can remember that feeling, and just you're kind of trying to recreate it in all these different ways, and then you realise at some point, I'm not going to recreate it. I've got to focus on this and this and this. Kelly.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, you're on now. We got you, I think.
Okay, I should just leave it off. I think echoing what they said, the identity is definitely a big one. In terms of other things I could add, I would say this is somewhat related, but just recalibrating what my goals are, right? Because I had this singular goal, like I'm going to go to the Olympics. I'm going to go to the Olympics. I'm going to go to the Olympics. And then I go to the Olympics. Check that goal off. And then it's like, okay, I still have a significant portion of my life left.
Right.
What should my new goal be? Do I need a new goal? Is it okay to not have this giant overarching singular checkoff goal and maybe create some sort of broader of, trying to just make a positive impact in the world, try to be a good parent? And I think that was, for me, I had basically spent every waking minute with that goal in mind. Like it would be 7 p.m. on a Friday and I'd be like, okay, 3 years from now, I want to be at the Olympics. Should I sleep right now? Do I need to eat protein right now? Do I need to watch film right now? Do I need to go to bed right now? Every decision was about reaching that goal. And all of a sudden, now my decisions needed a new basis. So that was a struggle. I think there's other athletes out there who probably have better life balance than I did, but I didn't have that. And then the other thing in terms of in the transition was being able to communicate all those things, all the experiences I had in my sport world into talking to people to get a new job, to create a new career. I think I did not, in hindsight, 7 years later, I look back at my resume, so I was like, oh man, that was a terrible resume. I could have described myself so much better now that I understand the corporate world better. Now that I understand the roles that I'm taking now, I was not effective about communicating that and understanding the values that I had learned and how they could have impacted the career and the jobs that I have now. So I think having support in that area would have been really helpful.
Yeah, and Kelly, you've been great at weaving in some stories. So I just wanted to stay with you on this actually, but just sort of morph into with those challenges in the background, whether it's your own story or an example of somebody you know who you thought actually just transitioned really successfully, and what do you see the elements were that drove that successful transition that could be translatable for other athletes and also for other companies to think about, oh, these might be things we can nurture and support?
Yeah, I think one of my Olympic teammates, Victoria Falayan, she recently got inducted into the USA Hall of Fame, actually. So she's pretty baller. I think she's somebody who I really look up to. I did as a player because she was just a phenomenal athlete, so intelligent. And after the Olympics, before the Olympics, she had been a middle school math teacher. She in Oakland. And then after the Olympics, she decided she wanted to transition into something in financial or actuarial services. And what I admire is that she had that goal and had a clear goal when she was a player, like, oh, when I'm done, I want to do this. And she went out and did it. She got a job at an insurance agency, kind of more entry level, and worked her way up. And now she's an actuarial analyst. So I think what was different from her to me is that she had this clear goal of plan of afterwards. Here's what I want to do. And then she was fortunate to find a company who was willing to be like, yeah, even though you're an athlete and a math teacher, we'll take you, we'll train you. And yeah, that was her. She's a wicked fast winger, scored a lot of tries.
Awesome. No, but it really reinforcing the clear goal and being able to communicate that and then focus your energy towards that. Phil, what would you add to that? What's your story you've got?
As far as an athlete transitioning well,
Yeah.
Yeah. So I this was interesting. So for 2 years in 2018, 2019, we shared an office space with Kobe Bryant. So he had just retired from the NBA. So he would talk to us about his 10 rules and talk to the team, and he would come to practice. So he was an alpha male. Like, I mean, he will tell, like, all the guys you think, oh, this guy, Phillip Rivers or Antonio Gates or all these great players, like when Kobe talked, everybody listened. So when he was younger, he was on, do guest shows on like Sister in the 90s. And then he always had an affinity for film. And being in Los Angeles, he networked really, really well with Glenn Keane of Disney, who's an animator and who's a big fan of the Lakers and Kobe. Obviously, most people were in the Los Angeles area. John Williams, one of the most famous composers, has done Star Wars and everything else that's any good. John Williams does. So he had a relationship with Kobe too, obviously. So when Kobe wanted to do his memoir called Dear Basketball, he used Glenn and John, and it won the Oscar, I believe in 2018. It won the Oscar for that. So when we were sharing an office space, so to see him win that award and transition and always have like that mindset to start Granity Studios and Mamba Productions and all of that stuff. And I really thought this was important because his 10th rule was learn storytelling. And for me, I always thought storytelling was to like keep the engagement level and entertainment level of my meeting high, tell a story. But his quote in Vanity Fair was, the best way to inspire the next generation of athletes is through stories. And what better way to have stories be told than through movies, television, and short films.
Amazing. So obviously very intentional networking combined with incredibly powerful storytelling that helps shape the path for everyone and inspire other people. Love it. Andy, you must have a lot of these examples, but what's the essence of?
There are a lot, but sort of from a personal note, one I know reasonably well is a young lady called Nzinga Prescott, who was a young athlete from Brooklyn, New York, and not a typical pathway. She went into fencing, and as a black athlete in 10 years ago, going into fencing was not the sort of normal route, but she was mentored and inspired by a guy called Peter Westbrook, who was the first ever black fencer to medal in the Olympics. And she was hugely influenced and inspired by him. And she went on to be a double Olympic athlete and a world champion. And then she retired post, it was a little bit later than Rio. She competed a bit after Rio, but we placed her with EY, a company that she never really thought that would be a natural home for her, but she was a very bright young lady, and we placed her there, and she started to develop a really, really good career there. She had an injury, a career-ending injury, and had to retire from that. But inspired by the new community in the world of business in New York and her background that she was from, she wanted to give back. So she created the Prescott Institute for Sport in Brooklyn, which with the support of the business community and the community in New York has developed amazingly to coach and mentor young athletes from underprivileged backgrounds and get them into the world of fencing and give them meaning and purpose in their life. And she's helped hundreds of kids now, and they're fully funded. And she's used her connections and her business and sporting prowess combined for the greater good of her community and where she came from. And she is now a mother herself. So it's an amazing story, which, I'm very proud that we've been a small part of her success along the way.
Love it. I love the three just completely different but very complementary examples there. And we're going to stay with Andy on the next bit. I just wanted to sorry, we've got somebody just joining. I just wanted to sort of close the gap between sort of purpose and identity, and just sort of clarify that for folks, given that that's my kind of day-to-day focus, which is purpose is this inside out understanding of what drives you when you're at your very best and how you uniquely and consistently deliver that very best you on a regular basis. It takes a lot of self-reflection, maybe projecting forward, but also thinking about when you are at your very best, what outcomes does that drive for other people? What impact does that lead towards? And once you can articulate that, because impact's a long-term thing, that becomes your kind of personal dream or vision that you work towards. And what you are doing with an intentionality perspective is, how can I infuse as many of these elements of my best self on a day-to-day basis in the different areas of my life through the different identities that I have and the different roles that I play, so that you're able to connect the sort of possibilities that are ahead with, if you like, what that best identity is that enables you to practice the things on a day-to-day basis and deliver as much impact as you can, from which you get the meaning and the fulfillment and the happiness and the excitement and the energy that enable you to be engaged and present and focused and everything else. And so when you understand that, you can set the right goals, because you're setting the goals based upon the essence of your best self. So I'm just providing that for context, because we're going to move in now to just get the panelists' views. And the reason I want to start with Andy on this is because we're looking now at the sort of company side of things, looking at corporations. And, you know, a big part of why I started this conversation is I just see so much potential and yet a relatively limited amount of investment or formal programs, right, that are in place to develop, nurture, and ultimately recruit and grow athletes. And obviously, smaller companies don't necessarily need programs. They can just sort of intentionally go after athletes. But some bigger companies, if they don't have a formal program in place, athletes just become no different than anybody else in terms of that process. And so I'm just interested, Andy, in what are your thoughts on the role that corporations could play in supporting the challenges that are there for athletes, but then also potentially having this opportunity to tap into an incredible talent pool. And you know, what could they get out of it, and why do you think it would be something that would make sense?
Yeah, I think we've seen multiple different ways that athletes do want to interact with athletes, from small to medium-sized companies who can be quite agile, and you can get to the leaders quite quickly, and they'll hire half a dozen athletes, create a culture in a team and develop that, which is great. But then really talking about, you know, the sustainability and the scalability of getting athletes into companies for the long term, you know, you need bigger business to engage in this in program style things that, like, we work on very well with some of the bigger companies, you know, all the way from, you know, they're looking at hiring some, you know, athletes who've been retired a few years into more experienced recruitment. But you see this kind of sweet spot is normally around the entry level roles, creating sort of internship pathways for 6-month internships where there's less risk for the athlete, less risk for the business. It's almost try before they buy. The athletes can get to know the company and vice versa. And we've worked on a number of these, and the athletes, after a couple of months, have shown their value, and then they tend to get picked off by various teams if they've been doing a rotational program. Most of them don't last 6 months. They've been pulled into a team that's appropriate for them and they've shown an interest in. But we're even working further back than that now with some of the bigger companies like EY. And Joyce Madawaka has put a great program, the readiness program, together at EY, which is creating learning opportunities for athletes, which we help source and bring into that pipeline. They can get some really valuable learnings from that, even some accreditations, and then they get access, or EY get access to that talent pool. And some of those have been pretty substantial in terms of the talent pool, and they can bring them into the entry level roles within the companies then. So I think just you have to be innovative, and the companies do have to invest, but what they get in is a unique access to a sustainable pipeline of talent that's going to bring them leaders and managers for the future. You know, one major success story at EY going back in 2016, there was a lady called Kim Brennan in Australia. She gold medal at the Rio Olympics and then made partner we moved her into EY after that, and she made partner after 4 years and had 2 kids along the way. It normally takes 16 years to become partner in EY. So she was definitely one of the leaders and managers for the future. But we get all kinds of success stories along the way. But yeah, it's, we see the smart companies are really seeing this as a sustainable pipeline of talent, as they do the military programs, mums returning to work, diversity programs. It's just part of their overall offering in the talent world.
Yeah, so I'm hearing there kind of adaptability and intentionality in terms of providing some sort of experience, some sort of bridge that enables companies to deliver value to those athletes and tap into that pool, and that try before you buy 6-month piece, as you said, but is this unique access to this sustainable pipeline of incredible
just to finish off on that, Mark, one thing that we do that is very effective, which gives us over 92% retention rate in companies, is we provide performance coaching from our side to make sure that behind the scenes we're working with the athlete to iron out any creases along the way, making sure they're working at 100% capacity, and that we're working with them and the business along the way to make sure that athlete not only sticks in that business but progresses at the right speed as well. So that's been very successful for us over the last 15 years.
Love it. So there's an ongoing partnership there with you and the
Exactly.
company as well, where with the athlete kind of in the middle, which is awesome. Phil, what's your perspective on this? On maybe sort of what could be in it for corporations?
Well, I think that just the education and the awareness around the skills that athletes may bring to the corporation are imperative to make sure that people understand that trade-off for the experience gap is worth it. And I think that's the biggest thing is that, is it worth it to train somebody who hasn't had any experience and has this long resume and some other occupation? Can you find enough transferable skills? And is that skill set going to equate to success within our corporate structure and our organization? I think that those are probably the most important things from my standpoint.
Love it. And Kelly, I'll have you provide any ads and then morphing into questions, because you've got a couple of questions from the audience here. So but close out on this point first, and then I'll spotlight you for questions as well.
Yeah, I don't know if I have that much to add. I would just say from my own experience, I was fortunate to be able to get a job in this insurance agents industry. And I'm a senior auditor now, so I'm definitely qualified and do a good job at my job. But looking at the hiring posts now for the company I work with, I was like, wow, I wouldn't have met these minimum requirements. And if AI is reading the resumes, then I wouldn't have gotten an interview. So I think just something that to be cognizant of is sort of what Phil touched on, is figuring out a way to be open to those sort of non-traditional resumes.
And that to me also just highlights, and just generally right in the world of AI and generative AI in particular, the importance of human connection. And so the storytelling and the communicating clearly what your goals are, and having the confidence to clearly articulate the unique skills you can bring, and networking and how all these pieces fit together. And really leaning into that human piece, which ultimately is going to be the way that you're going to be able to sort of break down some of the walls to get in the foot in the door, which is the first key challenge, isn't it? And so, Kelly, John McGuire, great friend of mine, former colleague of mine, another one of the many rugby people on the call here, had a couple of questions for you. John, do you want to fire them off?
Sure, Kelly. You had mentioned that, post-Olympic struggle of not having this massive goal that sort of drives all of your decisions on a daily basis. And it just resonated with me because it's not as large of a goal as the Olympics for myself, but I was really curious. You told that story and said it was quite a struggle. How did you reckon with that? Did you set new massive goals? Like, how did you work through that struggle? Where'd you end up?
Yeah, so I came to terms with someone, I can't remember who said this to me, but someone was like, those people who you talk to and they always talk about the good old days of high school and they're really obnoxious. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, don't be like that with the Olympics. Find some other purpose. so that like you're not like, oh, those Olympics, those are the best times of my life. So me personally, I'm not going to say this is the path for everyone, but for me personally, I've sort of got these more nebulous goals, you know, like I'm a mom, so I've got these like, I want my kids to be good people, I want to be a good mom. And then in my career, I want to make sure that I am performing well, I'm doing the best job at my job, but I don't have like an end, like I need to check off this box. And I've learned that in this stage of my life, maybe I'll change and create some different, more check off box goals. But at this point in my life, it's okay to just be enjoying the journey. And every day I want to do my best. Every day I still have that athlete mindset where like every day I want to do things well. I want to get a little bit better at something, either my own becoming a slightly better person, doing a slightly better parent, doing better at an audit. Like I still want to get better, but I can just do that as part of the journey, and I don't need this like one thing at the end. So that took a while to get to.
Fantastic answer. Thank you.
Kelly, I've got a follow-up for this, but this is probably the same for, or it could be asked of Phil and Andy as well, if they'd like to opine in it, which is, I think for a lot of elite level athletes, part of that experience is having that one big goal, and maybe that one big goal changes or is amended every year, because it could be around winning a championship or getting a new contract or Olympic type thing, or winning a medal in a World Cup or whatever. To what extent does having that big goal drive success as an athlete, but require you to maybe put some other areas of your life on ice? And therefore, to what extent, when you transition out of being an athlete, is it important to maybe not worry about having a big goal, but rather do exactly what you said and say, well, I've got a bit of a goal here on parenting and a goal on work, and actually you need more balanced goals in sort of the non-athlete life. What are your thoughts on that?
Me or
let's go Phil. Yes, let's go Phil, Andy, and Kelly's sort of opined on this.
I thought Kelly's answer on just the differentiating your goals, because I remember being in high school and like having pen relays the day after prom, so I could go to the prom, but then my parents like picked me right up from the banquet facility, brought me home, put me in the bed, put me in a car, drove me to Philadelphia. So that was like my childhood. And then every weekend in college, I was on a bus high jumping somewhere when everyone else was partying. So I think that those types of structures and discipline, like you just give up like so much of your young adult life, right? Just to try to be, an elite high jumper, or to be an elite rugby player or football player. So I think like having these great goals obviously helps in the weight room, right? So you need to work hard. So if I have a big goal and I'm a thin guy and I know I need to put on 15 pounds, it motivates me to go into the weight room at 6 a.m. and then at 7 p.m., to finish up my stuff. So for years, because I want to make a goal. So you're not going to have that same trajectory and that same drive towards every single thing, because now I have 2 children. So like if I was singularly focused, I'd have 0 children because they would take the kids and we'd be divorced, right? So your goals naturally have to shift from a singular purpose, selfish. That's why in MMA, they say you can't have 2 mouthpieces in the same household, because you're so selfish as a UFC fighter, cutting weight, training, that if you have a spouse that also does that, you never see each other, and you're so selfish with everything you're doing. It's just different as an athlete. So I think you just need to, again, like radically accept those differences, make more holistic goals that revolve around, things that are not necessarily performance oriented. You can't there's no scoreboard, which I love. Andy's right. I love a scoreboard, but like when I'm playing with my daughter or my son, there's not a scoreboard. Okay, 3 hours of great quality time and only 30 minutes of downtime. Like you're not getting those types of feedback in all areas of your life. And some may argue that those are the most important areas of your life.
And Andy, you can either answer that question, or we just got one. Gina just threw one more into the chat. So I'll offer up the new question, and you can choose which one to answer, because this will probably be the last one. So the new question is, what was the most challenging aspect for you in your transition from competition?
I think the most challenging, I mean, I'm from a rugby team, so, you've got 30, 40 guys there who you've, spent a lot of time with. They were at your birthdays, talk about the sacrifices. We didn't really have Christmas for many years because it was a big holiday season. There was a lot of games on. So, you'd spend Christmas Eve, New Year's Day, that sort of thing. But, you really miss those guys. And I think everyone involved with rugby and team sports will say that, I think. And it's some kind of walk away and shut themselves off a little bit. I think I did, because it was too painful to hear, what was going on and what have you. And then literally, it took a good number of years that I actually, started going back to watch rugby at the National Stadium in Wales, and then I became a fan then, and also having kids. And when you come out of professional sport, you're very conscious about financially getting things straight, chasing money, this, that, and the other. And it wasn't until I actually shifted with ACT and started looking how I could help people, and I had two young boys as well, that it was not about me. It was about how could I help other people? How could I bring up these two young men to be productive for the society? They started coaching at rugby. I started working with athletes. And that has just my life got a lot better after that. That you start looking out rather than in, and helping and having some of the fantastic stories we've done with athletes is brilliant. Coached my two sons' teams, and seen them turn into amazing young men. Which I've got a tiny little club I coach here in Wales, in South Gower, and we're a very, very small club, and we've actually got 4 under-18s boys in the Welsh national training squad from my tiny little club, who I've coached since they were sort of 6. So very, very proud, and I've done other things in my life, to be honest, but that's one of my proudest things. And just to see the way they are and the way that they've developed and how they hold themselves now as young men is more than enough for me at this stage of life.
I love that. And it's a really great way to close out, really. I think around understanding the elements of your best self and how they can serve and support and elevate other people. And that once you are able to reframe doing that for performance, for your team, for success, for winning, and for entertainment, and instead able to look at it from a lens of impact and benefiting other people, it enables you then to reapply your purpose in different areas of your life in a very, very meaningful way. And it's a huge part, a foundational part of transition, because there's a lot of other things that we discussed today as well that are a lot more tactical, but just as critical to change that bridge that experience gap. So
you said that word reframe, Mark. I think that's really a key component to understanding how to transition, right? Because like for football players, I got the Sunday sad. So I'm watching all my buddies, run around and everything. So I love football, but the act of watching football is like hurting me, right? So like Andy was describing. So like, you had to learn your tools on how to like get around, okay, this depression. And then, you had to get into like a mindfulness state, which allows you to kind of just be present where you are normally right now. Then the reframe happens, right? So now, okay, how do I reframe this? Well, shit, I'm grateful that I got to spend 4 years in that league and I got to participate in that. And then you've radically accepted the position that you're in. But without that reframe, there is no ability to move into a productive state.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you calling that out, Phil. And so look, just to close for our audience, firstly, thank you, Kelly, Phil, and Andy for joining us and sharing your insights. It's awesome to hear, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do it. For everyone else for joining in, thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this initial conversation and community. Part of how we're going to continue this, I'm just throwing a link here into the chat. This is called Connecting with Purpose. This is a podcast that I've done a couple of seasons of, and what I've decided to do for this season is kind of dedicate season 3 to the ecosystem around the elite athletes. So still taking a business leadership performance lens, but trying to raise more awareness around this. So So one, if you're not already subscribed and you want to sort of take a look at some of the past episodes, please do. But two, the ask is, if there's other people you know that would be interested in sort of connecting the dots and opening up some of these opportunities, and if people have talked to Andy and so on and so forth going forward, please, when I send the recording out to the people that registered through the website via email, to everyone else via LinkedIn, and a synopsis, if there's anyone you think would benefit from it, and particularly people in companies who you think, oh, I think, you know, they were an athlete, or they probably appreciate this, but they're not quite sure where to start, please use that as an opportunity to open up a conversation, open up an introduction. And if you have anybody you know that would be a good guest, I've got a handful of guests teed up for this next season, but that you think would be a really good guest from either an athlete perspective or an organizational perspective or a specialist sort of perspective, please just make an introduction. I'd love to have them on the show and just continue to have this dialogue to build awareness around this, what I believe to a really big opportunity. So with all that said, thank you to everybody. Have a brilliant rest of the week. Close it out strong. And look forward to continuing the conversation.
Cheers,
Cheers,
guys.
all.